President George W. Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, Laura Bush, and others from the White House have been making the rounds of interviews trying to make the case, a positive case, for the contributions that the Bush administration has made over its 8 years in office. One way to gauge what the Bush administration accomplished, of course, from our perspective here at Gallup, is to ask the people, which we did. 14 different issues, and for each one we said to Americans, did the U.S. make progress, stay still, or lose ground on that issue over the 8 years of the Bush administration? Let's look at them. First of all, there were 4 which had net positives. That is, more people said the U.S. made progress than said the U.S. lost ground, although I should note on none of these did a majority say the U.S. made progress. Let's look at them. Terrorism. That's been the issue that President Bush and others have really stressed has been his signature contribution. 40% of Americans say the U.S. made progress on terrorism during the Bush administration. 37% say that the Bush administration lost ground, but still it is a net positive on terrorism. Next, race relations. This could reflect the fact that Barack Obama was elected president, but nevertheless, the Bush administration gets credit on a net basis for making progress on that issue over the last 8 years. National defense in the military, net positive, and efforts to fight AIDS. Bush and others have talked about his contribution to fighting AIDS, particularly in Africa. You see from the numbers there, the American public seems to agree that on net balance, there was more progress than losing ground on that issue. Now let's go to the other end of the spectrum. There were 4 issues on which a majority of Americans said that the U.S. lost ground over the 8 years of the Bush administration. At the very bottom of the list, the economy. That's not surprising given the current state of the economy, but look at that number. 87% of Americans say that the U.S. lost ground of the economy over the 8 years of the Bush administration, so clearly that's going to be part of the historical legacy, unfortunately for Bush, of his administration. Next, the United States position in the world. 69% of Americans said the U.S. lost ground on that during the Bush administration. Healthcare, 52%, U.S. lost ground, and immigration, 51% say the U.S. lost ground. The other issues generally are more negative than positive, but kind of in a more middle-range position. A couple I want to mention briefly. Education. President Bush really stressed his no child left behind approach to education during his administration, yet as we're ending the administration now, more Americans say the U.S. lost ground than made progress on education. One other issue, taxes. Bush pushed tax cuts, yet now at the end of his 8 years, many more Americans say that the U.S. lost ground on taxes rather than gained ground. There you have it, a report card of sorts from the American people on the 8 years of the George W. Bush administration. I'm Dr. Frank Newport, Editor-in-Chief of the Gallup Poll.